All right, this is it. This is my moment. We get to Taft. Roosevelt decides not to run again. Remember, he didn't have a complete first term because he comes to office after McKinley is assassinated. He is going to hand pick William Howard Taft to be the Republican nominee, that should say. Taft was a very close friend and ally of his, had served in his administration. Taft, though, all of his positions had really been appointments. He had never engaged in a lot of political activity before in terms of elections. And so some of what Taft does wrong, I think, and he does a lot wrong, even though he's my favorite president, he definitely does a lot wrong, can be blamed in large part on that. Like, he is a political animal for sure, but he's not necessarily used to elections and as a politician at least. So Roosevelt says, my BFF, my best buddy, William Howard Taft, he'll be a great progressive president. And so because of that, he gets progressive support. Progressives like the idea of letting somebody else have a turn. Famously, progressive activists said, Roosevelt has had enough hay, now Taft will bring it in the barn. And conservatives also like Taft. They think Roosevelt's a crazy person. They call him a progressive mad messiah. And in the end, Taft won't be progressive enough for the progressives or conservative enough for the conservatives. Maybe it's my politically moderate heart that likes Taft so much as someone who doesn't make anybody happy. I feel like I can relate to that feeling. So I always think that's a sign that you're doing your job right if people on both sides of the coin have problems with what you're doing. So this is what the map looks like in 1908. Taft, and bless his heart, William Jennings Bryan is going to run for the Democratic nomination again. It's just not going well for him and his political career. So just so you know, Taft is my favorite president. He's not perfect, but he's my favorite, and here's why. So I've got a list for you. Are you ready? Okay, first of all, even though Roosevelt is known as the trust-busting president, Taft actually busted more trusts than Roosevelt. He believed in following the Constitution. This is pretty different from Roosevelt, right? He believed that presidential power should be limited, and he avoided taking executive action, so not signing executive, orders. And also, he didn't think that it was appropriate for the president to call on Congress to do something. This is where he takes a lot of criticism, and I think there's some truth and some fairness to this criticism. Taft didn't advocate for a position. He was just like, well, it's not my job. That's Congress's job. But, you could speak up for what you believed in. He's the only president to ever, this is my favorite part, ever serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after he was President of the United States, of course. He's going to be appointed by Harding, and he called the Supreme Court appointment the honor of his life. His wife, Nellie, is responsible for planting all those cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been to D.C., especially in May, seeing those trees in bloom along the avenue, that was his wife. He's the first president to work out of the Oval Office in the West Wing. He's the first president to have a car in office. He's the first president to throw out the first pitch in a baseball game, and he also probably invented the seventh inning stretch. He's the first president to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He advocates for the building of the Supreme Court building. There's no Supreme Court building at the time, and also the building of the Lincoln Memorial. And he never got stuck in a bathtub. It's not a true story. He was probably like 350 at his heaviest, which, although at the time seemed extremely heavy, I think now people are kind of shrug their shoulders at that. He wouldn't have looked out of place. But people always remember him as the big one, right? The big president. But he wasn't really that big. He did once overflow a tiny bathtub, and he had to have his bathtubs custom made for his larger size. But once he joined the Supreme Court, he started working with a dietitian, and he became a fitness junkie, and he lost like 100 pounds. He'd walk to and from work. So he got down to like 250 towards the end of his life. So yeah. Okay, so Taft is labeled as a progressive president, but there are some people who think he was more conservative. Taft doesn't like high tariffs, which is a very typical progressive attitude. Progressives felt that high tariffs limited competition, that they hurt consumers, and that they did too much to protect trusts. But lowering tariffs is controversial, and so Taft does attempt tariff reform, but it will end up splitting the Republican Party into progressives who want to reduce tariffs and conservatives who want to keep tariffs high. The end result is the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which Taft signs into law. It does very little to lower tariffs. Progressives feel abandoned. Conservatives think, why did we just go through this drama? It doesn't really do much. This is a political cartoon on the right. It says, getting ready for the 4th, a mean trick to play on a unsuspecting elephant. And so here you have Taft sort of blowing up the GOP with fake tariff reform. He also does some things to make Roosevelt mad. He replaces Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior with a man named William Ballinger, who is a conservative corporate lawyer. So he kicks out a conservationist and puts a lawyer in. Ballinger will attempt to open public lands to private development, and he will be accused of trying to make a personal profit. The accuser is Gifford Pinochet, who we talked about with Roosevelt. He will be fired. Congress will clear Ballinger of wrongdoing, but again, progressives feel abandoned and disillusioned by Taft, and Democrats will make gains in those midterm elections. Here are some political cartoons. You start to see Roosevelt publicly speaking out against Taft and what Taft is doing. That's why I called them frenemies at the beginning. There's a really wonderful book. If y'all have heard of a historian named Doris Kearns Goodwin, it's like this 2,000-page book. It's not that long, but it's really long, about their friendship. And there's they are very close friends for most of their life, and then in the aftermath of what Roosevelt sees as Taft's failure as a president, they have a massive falling out. They don't speak for years, and then there's a story of Roosevelt walking into a restaurant and seeing Taft there and going up to him and shaking his hand, and that's it. They become friends again for the remainder of their lives. They just sort of get over it, and I love that story. But we do know that they have a falling out, and we do know that Roosevelt is disappointed with Taft and his behavior, his actions in office, or what Roosevelt sees as Taft's lack of action in office. And so Roosevelt will run against Taft for the Republican nomination. And so why? Well, on October 27th of 1911, Taft will announce that his administration will sue U.S. Steel, because that's J.P. Morgan, because he bought Tennessee Coal and Iron Company. Do y'all remember? That was what ended the Panic of 1907. And Roosevelt was like, I give you my word, you won't be sued for antitrust. Well, Taft turns around and sues him for antitrust. And also, the Wisconsin leader, Robert La Follette, is going to drop out of the presidential race. So, the election of 1912, Roosevelt unsuccessfully challenges Taft for the Republican nomination. So, Taft will be the Republican nominee. And so, he will create a third party, the Progressive Party, or also known as the Bull Moose Party, because Roosevelt said he was as strong as a bull moose. And he will challenge Taft. They'll split the vote, and Roosevelt will win. During a campaign stop where Roosevelt is delivering a speech, Roosevelt is shot. There's an assassination attempt. He's shot in the chest, but he's got like a thick glasses case in his pocket, and also a folded up copy of a very long speech tucked in there, and it slows the bullet down enough. It still gets lodged in his chest, and it actually never gets removed. It stays there until he dies, because they say it's more dangerous to remove it than to leave it in. But he gets shot and then continues with his speech. And he says, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. So there we go. Roosevelt will campaign on new nationalism, which is this idea that government should intervene to support the Square Deal, that we should accept economic concentration, which means wealth at the top, but the government should control it. Wilson will campaign on new freedom, limit government. He thought bigness is wrong. And this is his foundation of New Freedom. Wilson said, this is a progressive viewpoint, but he said that we are fighting, Americans are fighting what he called the triple wall of privilege, which were high tariffs, trusts, and high finance. Roosevelt wants to break down the triple wall of privilege, which would lead to new freedom, make America more affordable for all Americans. So if we start to the right of the triangle, how is he going to deal with trusts? He says companies are still limiting competition for small businesses and keeping overall prices high by forming large trusts. For high finance, he said people in America do not have money to pay interests. Rates on loans and borrowing, high interest rates on loans and borrowing, and tariffs. Costs are too high for most Americans to afford, yet tariffs are the main source of revenue for the federal government. He wants to change that. So, Wilson. I'm trying to decide if I want to stop it here, and I think I do. We'll do Wilson momentarily.